Welcome, everybody, to the Fonseca Fantasy Files. I'm your host, Austin, and today I'm going to be giving you guys my top 105 Dynasty rankings. So, for a little bit of my backstory and how I like to play Dynasty. With the way I like to play Dynasty, I play Superflex Dynasty Leagues, non-tight end premium, and that's what the channel is going to be covering until about August. So my own philosophy on this is that I like to build my team around the quarterback and the wide receiver position. This is because these guys usually tend to last the longest, and they hold the most value throughout the years, regarding of injury and contract status. Unless there's a tight end who produces like a Brock Bowers or a Travis Kelce, I would prefer to get a positional advantage there, but that's just a little bit on the backstory how I like to play Dynasty. So, getting into the first tier, my first tier of players would be Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. These guys are in a tier of their own, and these guys all have the capability to be wide receiver 1 or QB 1 and maintain that value for years to come. All of these players in this tier 1 all have either been a wide receiver 1 or a quarterback 1 so far, except for Jaden Daniels, as he's only a rookie, but he showed the most upside we've seen out of a rookie quarterback in a long time. So, in our next tier, we have Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, Puka Nacua, Brock Bowers, Bijan, and Jahmyr Gibbs. With these guys are probably going to be in the mid-first round of your startup drafts, all the way to the end of the first round, early second round. These guys, they all have the same ceiling as the guys in the first tier, but their floors, I would say, are not as safe. So when it comes to Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow, they are elite quarterbacks in today's game, but due to injury risk with Joe Burrow or a lack of a passing volume like Jalen Hurts, as we just saw him not even throw for 3,000 yards this past year, puts him in a tier below the guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels. Now for receivers like CeeDee Lamb, Puka, and Malik Neighbors, they definitely have the ceiling of Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but I don't think they have the floor to compete with those guys, and we haven't seen them do it as consistently as those two guys, and those two guys are really in a tier of their own at this point in time. Now, it might be a shock, but I have Brock Bowers in my top 12 overall Dynasty players. This is because he just gives a huge positional advantage, especially if you're playing in tight end premium leagues. He'll basically be producing as a wide receiver 1, like a Justin Jefferson, like a Jamar Chase in your league, and that'll be giving you a huge point advantage over your opponent. And then the only 2 running backs to make this list in the top tier 2 so far are Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. This is just because these guys have the draft capital that will insulate their value for the next couple of years, and these guys are arguably 2 of the top 3, most definitely top 5 running backs in the league right now. To start off in tier 3, I have Ashton Genty, Patrick Mahomes, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr. All these guys can definitely make their way up into tier 2. I had Amon-Ra as a tier 2 player before the last year's NFL, but due to the loss of Ben Johnson, and I think we'll have a little bit of regression due to that. Ashton Genty can definitely get put up into tier 2, but he's still an unknown. Same goes with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes has usually been a top 4 fantasy quarterback outside the last 2 years, QB8 and QB11, which have been pretty down years in his career. But with the addition of Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy and a full season of Hollywood Brown, I think he'll definitely have the ability to bounce back. Some other guys in this tier include Brian Thomas Jr., Caleb Williams, Drake May, Drake London, Nico Collins, and Bo Nix. So there's a lot of year 2 quarterbacks in this tier. It's because these guys all have proven they've been fantasy good so far throughout their careers, and they have the draft capital to back them up. So where even if they were to have a down year, they're still pretty relatively safe assets on your dynasty team. So you can definitely build around these guys, these quarterbacks, and not have to worry about them for the next 2 to 3 years. Now, when it comes to the case of Drake London and Nico Collins, I think that both of these guys can definitely end up in a tier 2 by the end of this year. I'm very high on Drake London this year. I think he has the ability to be a top 5 or even top 3 receiver at the position this year, fantasy-wise. Same goes with Nico Collins. The thing with Nico Collins and why I was debating about putting him higher or lower was his injury history. Over his last 4 years in the NFL, he's missed a fair amount of time due to injuries. He has a lingering hamstring issue, which always concerns me when it comes to owning players because that's just a soft tissue injury, and You never know when that something like that could just flare up, but he has the production that has shown us to be why he's an elite wide receiver and an elite dynasty asset. So at that point, I think he's definitely a top 24 player and someone you could definitely build your team around as your wide receiver one. And that brings us to tier 4 of my dynasty rankings. So this tier consists of players such as Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Justin Herbert, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., CJ Stroud, AJ Brown, and Garrett Wilson. So to start with Ladd McConkey, he's definitely one of the best PPR receivers you can have in Dynasty. He soaks up a ton of targets, and he's great separation on his routes, and he immediately provides slot opportunities for Justin Herbert. With Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's still developing into the wide receiver one role. I would have him higher, but with the loss of DK Metcalf and now the addition of Cooper Kupp, that definitely takes away some of his targets from the slot, which concerns me. So he might not see as many targets, but another thing to bring into mind is that Sam Darnold is not the QB. I don't know about you guys, but I am not the biggest believer in Sam Darnold. I am a Seahawks fan, I will say that. So I do try to keep my biases aside, but I am not a fan of the Clint Kubiak hiring and the Sam Darnold signing. I think it's just not going to work out the way we want it to for fantasy, and for myself as a fan, I'm not too optimistic about our outlook this year. But Jackson Smith and Jigba is still definitely one of these guys you can build around. He's going into year 3. He's going to have at least another solid 2-3 years minimum going forward. So he's definitely someone you can still build around. In the case of Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud, they're the only QBs in this tier. These guys can definitely move all the way up, or they can go down. Herbert definitely has the running ability sometimes when he decides to run, but in the Greg Roman offense, it's just not, it's more run heavy, and I think because of that, it kind of caps him a little bit. And with CJ Stroud, he provides almost nothing on the ground. However, he is surrounded by elite weapons. He does have Nico Collins. They did draft 2 receivers for him this year, and they still have Joe Mixon to run the ball. So it should be a pretty balanced Texan passing approach this year. They just guarded Bobby Slowick, who killed their offense last year. He was not good at all. So I'm not sure who they replaced him with, but the Texans' offense should definitely be rebounding from what they were last year. So to some people's surprise, I have Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. in the same tier together. I think that last year they should have both produced equally. Maybe not for Marvin, but I think this year is definitely going to be the year we see Marv break out, because year 2, this is usually when we see some wide receiver breakouts, and I think an extra year of him developing some chemistry with Kyler Murray is definitely going to be beneficial for him. And then to go to Trey McBride, I think we're going to see some positive regression when it comes to him and his touchdowns. I think last year he only scored 1 or 2 touchdowns, which is really low for the amount of catches and targets that he had. But just with some positive regression, that number will go up, and I think he'll still see the same amount of targets and catches and yards that we saw this last year. And then to end out the tier, we have AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson. So AJ Brown's definitely getting older. I mean, he's 28, but he's still in his prime of his career. So I can't have him much lower than this, but I also don't think I can have him any higher than where he is right now. He's still going to produce as a wide receiver one. He's still the main passing target in the Eagles offense, so that'll keep his value elevated for the next couple of years, and he's tied to Jalen Hurts, who he has great chemistry with, so that's all around a benefit for AJ Brown. Now, Garrett Wilson, I definitely think Garrett Wilson is the most volatile player in this tier. He's going into his age 25, 26. He's going to be 25 or 26 once the year is over, and with Justin Fields, I'm not really sure how that's going to go. I know a lot of people were happy when Justin Fields signed with the Jets because they saw what DJ Moore did with Justin Fields 2 years ago, and DJ Moore came out as a wide receiver 6 in PPR scoring that year, but DJ Moore was also one of the best YAC players that year. He was top 10 every YAC category, so a lot of that was just DJ Moore and not the benefit of Justin Fields, and Garrett Wilson is definitely not the YAC player that DJ Moore is right now, so that's why I have him at the end of tier 4. But with a good year, I still don't think he can jump any higher than what he really is, because Justin Fields is probably not the long-term answer there, and he's still never been tied to a stable QB situation so far in his career. So now this brings us to tier 5 of my rankings. So to start off tier 5, we're going to see a lot of the rookies from your rookie drafts this year. So this tier consists of Tedero McMillan, Omarion Hampton, Travis Hunter, Jordan Love, Devon Achane, Saquon Barkley, and Kyler Murray. So I'll start off with the 3 rookies, Ted McMillan, Omarion Hampton, and Travis Hunter. All these guys easily have the ability to jump up in value. I think they're definitely going to hold their value for at least this year. Tedero McMillan was the biggest and probably the best wide receiver prospect in this class. He's excellent ball skills, and he's probably going to see a ton of targets from Bryce Young, as he's basically the main focal point of this offense, because there's not much else around there. They have Xavier Legette and Chuba Hubbard in the run game, but the passing options are really limited over there. Adam Thielen is not getting any younger or any better. He's going to be 35 at the end of this year, so I'm really expecting a big year out of Ted McMillan. Now for Omarion Hampton, he had the bell cow potential in college. He had great contact balance, and he was a first-round pick, which is always great. The hit rates for first-round running backs are awesome. They usually always produce right away. However, with him, Najee Harris is still there, so he may be limited a little bit, maybe in a 60-40 fashion, kind of how David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs were to start out, but I definitely see him overtaking this backfield, at least by the halfway point. And now Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter, he's the most polarizing player in the draft, one of the most polarizing players we've seen in the last 5-10 years. He's a dual plays both sides of the field. And if he plays a lot of wide receiver, I'm definitely higher on him than I am right now. He's tied to Trevor Lawrence and Liam Cohen. I think Liam Cohen's definitely going to bring the best out of Trevor Lawrence this year. We've seen Liam Cohen offenses, at least last year, he brought the best out of Baker, throwing 40-plus touchdowns. And even if Travis Hunter just ends up taking the role as the wide receiver 2, we saw the wide receiver 2s in Tampa Bay last year do amazing. Chris Godwin, before his injury, he was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. And then towards the back half of the year, Jalen McMillan was also amazing to end the year. He caught 8 touchdowns and had about 600 yards, even though he hadn't been getting the many snaps to start the year. So with the QBs in this tier, I have Jordan Love and Kyler Murray. Jordan Love, this is definitely going to be a make or break year for him in fantasy, I would say. He had the great year 2 years ago, and then last year he had the MCL sprain, and then I think he really had a groin injury. So I believe he was probably playing through some pain and, just trying to get through it and not miss any time for his team. So I think that definitely limited his abilities last year. And they also found great strengths in the run game with Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs was amazing for them in the run game, and I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, at least I didn't. So with Jordan Love, I think it's definitely a big year for him, and he definitely has QB low and QB1, high and QB2 value still, but I still believe you should roster him. He's definitely one of these guys you can still build around for fantasy. Now in the case of Kyler Murray, he's definitely one of the most dual threat quarterbacks we have right now. He can run for 500 yards a year plus, and he can also throw for 3,700 yards plus. So the health is his biggest concern coming off the ACL tear. Also being a smaller quarterback, that definitely leaves him more prone to injury, which is definitely a risk when it comes to building your team around a quarterback, which is what I believe in. So there's definitely some risk with Kyler Murray, but year 2 of Marvin Harrison Jr., another year with Trey McBride, and then James Conner and Trey Benson, I really think are going to be a great 1-2 punch this year in the run game. So I'm honestly pretty optimistic for this Cardinals offense this year. And then the only 2 running backs in this tier, as I said, we don't really build around running backs around here in Dynasty. Those are usually the last parts of the team you have to fill out. But you have to respect value where it is and respect, the points these guys put up every week. So Devon Achane and Saquon Barkley, these are definitely some of the most explosive and powerful, talented running backs we have in the league. Devon Achane has some of the most explosive speed, and he's definitely a big play guy. But the thing that caused a concern for me with him is, his injury durability. He's missed multiple games the last 2 years, and he's been great with Tua. But if Tua were to get hurt again, that probably wouldn't look too good in his favor. Now with Saquon Barkley, I'm very much against running backs or rostering running backs, drafting running backs on a startup that are 28, 27, 28, 29 years old. That's usually the cliff, and we just saw Saquon Barkley have the most touches of his career, and he ran for 2,000 yards. So I think if you're drafting him and still expecting him to do what he did last year, I think you're you're expecting too much from him, and I think a more realistic outcome for him this year would probably be 1,400 yards and like 10 to 13 touchdowns, which will still be an amazing running back season. And it's definitely produced as an RB1, but with the injury concern, he might get less touches. Year two, Will Shipley. Not saying that Will Shipley is the greatest thing ever, but I can definitely see Saquon being phased out of this offense a little more. And the Eagles are definitely going to have a harder schedule this year, so I don't expect them to run the ball at a 55% rate. So it's going to be in a lot more closer games to where they'll have to pass the ball at the end of the game, not just give it to Saquon at the end of the game so they can just run out the clock and win on time of possession with minimal possessions for these Eagles offense like last year. So now that'll bring us to Tier 6. Tier 6 is definitely the biggest tier we've had so far. And the players in this tier, we have two QBs in Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield. Also a couple running backs in Bucky Irving, Travion Henderson, Breece Hall, Quinshaw Judkins, and Jonathan Taylor, along with Cam Ward to go with the quarterbacks. And then as the receiver position, we got T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, and Rome Odunze. So let's start off with the quarterbacks. I think Brock Purdy definitely has the safest floor in the San Francisco offense. It's very offensive friendly and fantasy football friendly. The full year we had Brock Purdy in his first year, full year as a starter, finished as QB5, which is pretty. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. At least I didn't. And with Christian McCaffrey still there, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, Kyle Shanahan, and Juwan Jennings, the weapons definitely aren't going anywhere. So he definitely still has the potential to produce as a QB1 again. Now with Baker Mayfield, I'm definitely a lot lower than him than consensus. I definitely don't think he's going to throw 40 plus touchdowns again in his third new system in 3 years. But he still does have, great weapons surrounding him. He's definitely going to be a great starter for you every week, and either as your main QB or as your super flex. I prefer him more as a super flex on my team. But the weapons give him probably one of the safest floors in fantasy football right now, so you definitely can't go wrong with him. And then we have Cam Ward. So Cam Ward, number 1 overall pick. He's guaranteed to have at least 2 to 3 years of holding his value and some production. So he's going to be a day 1 starter most likely. The offense isn't that good right now. It's only Calvin Ridley and some limited other receiving options, but I think with some time and some development and the addition of some new receivers, I think Cam Ward can definitely rise to be one of these elite fantasy football QBs. So that'll bring us to the running backs of this tier. We got Bucky Irving, Travion Henderson, Breece Hall, and Quinshaw Judkins. All these guys, it's honest. I see all these guys in the same light. I definitely have Bucky as my favorite, but I think you can put these guys in any order, and I think you'd be happy. These are all guys that they're young enough and they're good enough to where you want to have them as your RB1 of the future going forward, and especially on contending teams. I mean, you're definitely happy to have some of these guys as your starters so far. So. And that'll bring us to the receivers. So the receivers here we have, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, and Rome Odunze. So T. Higgins and Rashee Rice are definitely, I'd say two of the more underrated guys. I think Rashee Rice is definitely one of the most underrated receivers in the game right now. He's going to take up a bunch of slot targets. He's going to get a bunch of yards. He's a great yak receiver, and that's all you can really ask for in fantasy football. Get peppered with targets, get a ton of yards, and he's gonna score some touchdowns. That's just what he does, and he's great. So Rashee Rice, especially after coming off that bad knee injury, he's definitely a buy low for me now too. So get as much as Rashee Rice as you can, and I don't think you'll regret it. Now with T. Higgins is getting the most wide receiver 2 money in NFL history, so you can't go wrong with him. He's tied to top 5 passing offense for the rest of his contract. As long as Joe Burrow's there, I got no worries with him. And now Rome Odunze definitely is probably the most volatile player in this tier. I know he can go all the way up, or he could also go burning, so go down with the ship. He had a pretty alright rookie year. Can't be mad with what he gave us. He gave us about 800 yards, a couple touchdowns, some good targets, good target percentage. But, the Bears offense is loaded with weapons. DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, Luther Burden, Colson Loveland, and Luther Burden. So, there's, plus the run game. They're going to have to run the ball. So, where does Rome really fit on the pecking order? I still think he's probably the number 2 option in this passing offense behind DJ Moore. Maybe it's more like a 1A, 1B type of scenario because Rome Odunze is, the big body of this wide receiver room. He's more someone who can go up and get the ball. So he's definitely has the ability to go up, but I can definitely see him going down. So for right now, I think this is probably where he should be, and I think his future looks pretty well. So we just have to wait and see on what this Bears offense looks like this upcoming NFL season. Now this will bring us to just about the halfway point. These next two tiers, tier 7 and 8. We'll start tier 7. So this is definitely one of the biggest tiers I have. All these guys, depending on where you are in your startup draft or what your team need is, whether you're a rebuilder or a contender, there's definitely players that fit every mold and every type of team. So for the QBs, we got Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Jared Goff. So depending on where your team is, and whether you're a contender, you're retooling, or you're rebuilding, all these guys have a great fit. If I'm a contender, I'm definitely targeting Dak Prescott this year. Dak Prescott's probably gonna have this is probably gonna be the best. This is the best weapons he's had in his career. You got CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens on the outside. Got Jake Ferguson or Schoonmaker taking up the middle of the field. They still got Cavante Turpin. Jalen Tolbert is not terrible. And the run game, I don't think the run game is going to be that bad. I mean, the run game last year was not great. But, the addition of Javonte Williams and Jaden Blue, I definitely think will help with this Cowboys offense. So now if you're, a rebuilder, I definitely think you should be targeting JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix. I think these guys both have great floors. I think Michael Penix is definitely going to be a great asset in Dynasty. I think his Dynasty value is only going to go up. He's tied to Drake London and Bijan Robinson. They have a great O-line, and they have a team that believes him. I mean, the owner went out of their way to draft this guy at number 8 right after they signed Kirk Cousins. So he's definitely somebody that's going to maintain his value and produce fantasy-wise for you for the next couple of years. Same with J.J. McCarthy. I mean, J.J. McCarthy, they drafted him for a reason, for him to be the franchise guy. So he's got at least 3 years there, plus a 4th with the 5th-year option if they decide to pick that up. And, he's tied to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Kevin O'Connell, and TJ Hawkinson. So, that right there is more than enough for me to have some confidence in J.J. McCarthy this year fantasy-wise. And we also just saw what Sam Darnold did last year within the same scenario. Sam Darnold was a QB1, and he had the greatest year of his career, and he ended up getting paid by my Seahawks because of it. So you definitely can't go wrong with J.J. McCarthy. And, just to go to Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff, these guys are definitely some solid QB2s. Put them as your super flex. I think you can put them in there and not have to worry about it. Jared Goff has been great, but however, I am a little bit worried about the loss of Ben Johnson. And with Trevor Lawrence, I think he can definitely, make his way up into the tier 6 or tier 5, depending on how well he does in this Liam Cohen offense. They have Brian Thomas Jr., they have Travis Hunter, they have Brenton Strange, they have 3 running backs that none of us know who is really going to start yet. And so, I mean, the O-line has been improved, so I don't really think T-Law can get any worse than what he's had to deal with so far throughout his career. Next, this will bring us to the RBs of this tier, and that being only Kyren Williams and Josh Jacobs. Kyren Williams is definitely one of the more risky players. If you are a rebuilder, I would be trying everything to get him off my team because, he's not guaranteed to be a Ram next year. He's going into the last year of his contract, and he's been a volume guy. I mean, I love some Kyren Williams. He went to Notre Dame. He's a great player there. But he has been playing just about 80+% of the snaps every game for the Rams as long as he's been healthy. So that definitely concerns me. And he's been injured too. He's had injuries against the end of last year, not this previous year, the year before with the broken hand, and he's been hurt before that previous year before throughout the season. So that also raises some concern for me. But if you are a contender, definitely keep him. I feel like he's definitely gonna produce similarly how he has the last 2 years, being RB7 in both of the last 2 years. Now with Josh Jacobs, I think Josh Jacobs is definitely the more safer of the two, but I don't think his ceiling is as high as Kyren. I think Josh Jacobs is definitely going to be there for the next 2 years. He's been great in that run system, so he's really fitting well in the Matt LaFleur offense. So I really think there's no worries with him. You can have him as your RB1, or your even better if he's your RB2, because he's going to produce amazingly in this Packers offense. And then that'll bring us to our receivers of this tier, being Emeka Ibuka, Devonta Smith, Xavier Worthy, and DK Metcalf. Now, the one shock you might see here is probably DK. DK is definitely a little bit older, but he did just get that massive contract from the Steelers, 5 years, $150 million. So he's getting $30 million a year for the next 5 years. And that alone makes me feel safe enough to roster him over a lot of other guys in the tiers below for the next 2 to 3 years. He's definitely going to be the alpha target in this offense, and I really don't see anyone else who will take that from him. Definitely not this year, and unless they draft somebody at the wide receiver position next year, I see this as being DK Metcalf's wide receiver room for years to come. Now, with Emeka Ibuka, Devonta Smith, and Xavier Worthy, I definitely think Xavier Worthy definitely has the highest ceiling of these guys, but I'm also not too sure about how I feel about him. He had a great end to the playoffs, great into the year last year, especially in the playoffs, catching all those touchdowns and looking as Mahomes' number one option. But, I expected a lot more from him during the regular season, especially after Rashee Rice went down and Travis Kelce also looked like a shell of himself for most of the year. So it'll be a big, big testament to what he can do in his NFL career of this upcoming year. Now, Emeka Ibuka, I feel like this year he's definitely trapped like how JSN was in year one, with 2 proven receivers ahead of him. And, he's probably looking for a slow start out of Godwin, coming off the broken ankle, or, maybe someone else gets injured. Mike Evans has been hurt the last couple of years, same with Chris Godwin. So I feel like he could definitely slide into one of those roles and provide well. But, if that doesn't happen and all those guys stay healthy, it'll definitely be harder for him to break out, and that could definitely see his value drop. Now, Devonta Smith is probably one of my biggest sells right now. I'm just not as big on him as everybody else. He is probably one of the best actual football wide receiver twos, but in fantasy football, this isn't the case. The Eagles haven't passed enough for him to show this value as a real wide receiver two, putting up good enough numbers. He's capped by A.J. Brown too, so A.J. Brown's going to be the first one to eat in this offense, so it's going to be hard for him to overcome that. And he's also gotten worse every year since his second year in the league. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how he does this year, but I'm not as optimistic. And to end this tier, we got Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta is my tight end 3. After that good tight end 1 season, he kind of fell off a little bit, but he's definitely maintained his value, and I don't see him losing value anytime soon. I think there's a clear gap between McBride, between Laporta and the rest of the guys below him. So now this will officially bring us to the halfway point in tier 8. This is definitely the biggest tier that I have. I feel like a lot of these guys in these positions, it's really just a matter of personal preference. Just to go over the QBs, not to go on too long here. The only QBs I have in this tier are Bryce Young and Jackson Dart. These 2 guys, both from first-round picks. Jackson Dart's probably not going to play this year, so his value is definitely going to be insulated until he does start. And, once the consensus is out and if he's good or not, that'll be the telltale of what he becomes in the NFL and what he becomes as a dynasty asset. Bryce Young definitely had a poor first rookie year, but, the new coaching staff last year, especially if they came back after that benching, he looked great. He looked like a lot better. He looked a lot more confident, and he looked like he had a lot more trust in himself and in his receivers and his other players. So I'm very optimistic for Bryce, especially with Ted McMillan. He finally has that true alpha target for him to finally rely on, instead of a 34-year-old Adam Thielen and, Xavier Legette. Not that Xavier Legette's terrible, but, he's definitely not what they were probably hoping for him to be this past year. So for the running backs in this tier, I have R.J. Harvey, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Chase Brown, and Caleb Johnson. So, 2 rookies. Very high on the rookies out of this rookie class. This RB class is probably one of the greatest we've seen in recent memory. R.J. Harvey, I think he can definitely be utilized as Sean Payton's, main RB. And he can definitely hold a lot of the carries. He had a big workload in college, and he's very explosive. So I don't see why he wouldn't be able to. And, he has that workhorse profile, and he's a dual threat. He can catch the ball. He can also run between the tackles. So, that's very good for him. In terms of Kenneth Walker, we know what Kenneth Walker is. He's a great points per game running back, but the reason he's a great points per game running back is, because he doesn't play the whole year. He's had the same oblique injury for his whole career, basically, since he's been to Seattle. So that definitely hinders, his ceiling, because he's probably going to miss time again. But the new run scheme in Seattle, I can definitely see why he'd be a target of many people for this year. Now, with James Cook, I'm completely out on James Cook. This holdout thing is not good. It's never worked out in any running back's favor. I mean, you can go back all the way back to Le'Veon Bell saying, he wishes he never held out when he held out with Pittsburgh, and then, he ended up going to the Jets, and we all know what happened to his career from there and went straight downhill. So there's definitely a big concern with James Cook, and also the amount of touchdowns he scored last year. I'm not sure if that's really, consistent. He scored, I think, 16 or 18 touchdowns last year, so definitely concerns me. I don't think he'll be able to do that again. Now, when it comes to Chase Brown, I like Chase Brown. He's a good running back, but it's just the draft capital that scares me. He's only a 5th-round pick, so there's definitely no secure ties with him to be there for a while. But he did produce, and he fit well in this offense. He can catch the ball, he can run the ball, and he's explosive, and he does everything you'd want him to do in that offense. So there's really no reason for him to lose his job, but there's also no guarantee that he holds it for the next couple of years. So. And then that'll bring us to the last RB of this tier, Caleb Johnson. A great downhill runner. He went to the Steelers. Steelers are going to be a run-first team with Arthur Smith there. So, I definitely see him splitting carries with Jalen Warren to start, but I definitely can see him overtaking that backfield. And I actually did forget about Christian McCaffrey. I don't know how. He's still arguably the best running back in the game when he's healthy. However, the age is definitely the biggest concern, especially with this Achilles injury. Achilles injuries are definitely not something you want in your running back, especially in drafting someone in a startup or trading for them, and he could get hurt before the season even starts. Like last year, we thought he was going to play, and the 49ers were really secretive about it. So can we really trust the 49ers? I mean, I love the 49ers. I love them in fantasy football, but that is definitely a cause of concern for me in this upcoming year. So now this will bring us to the receivers of this tier. In this tier, I have Matthew Golden, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Chris Olave, and Brandon Ayuk. So, with Matthew Golden, one of the Packers' first time in a while using a first-round pick on a receiver. So, that definitely has some, brings some excitement to his name and can definitely boost his value, at least right now. But I'm not sure how much I believe in this Packers offense. They have all those young wide receivers still looking for work, production and trying to get targets. So it definitely, caused me a little bit of concern. And he was a great prospect, don't get me wrong, but I'm just concerned about the amount of times they run in this offense and the amount of mouths they have this feed. Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, Josh Jacobs was good in the passing game. They also have Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. If he can figure out the drop issue, he's going to be great because he's an amazing route runner right now at this point in this stage in his career. So that definitely makes me a little worried about Matthew Golden. Now with Jordan Addison, he's great, but the only thing with him is that he's stuck behind Justin Jefferson. He's never going to be this number one guy in this offense. So he's a great route runner. He's great after the catch. He's also a big play threat. He catches a lot of touchdowns, but I also think that might be a little bit why I'm a little bit lower. I could see a little bit of positive regression. He may not catch as many touchdowns as he did last year, but I don't know if he's going to have the targets and the catches and receiving yards to make up for that lost production. So that's definitely one of my concerns with Addison, but he's definitely a good wide receiver 3 to have on your dynasty team right now. So now when it comes to Zay Flowers and Chris Olave, these two guys, I'm very worried about them, but we still have to respect them. Both former first-round picks, and they've produced. I mean, Zay Flowers has only been a very high-tier wide receiver 3 in his career, but his points per game is very concerning. He's not a very good points per game receiver, and with Chris Olave, I feel like he might be one concussion away from retirement. Unfortunately, he's had a bunch of concussions due to Derek Carr throwing him hospital passes throughout the last 2-3 years. So that's definitely one of my concerns. Lamar Jackson, he's never produced a real super good wide receiver 1 fantasy season for somebody, and I don't know how that's going to happen from Zay Flowers. They just got back Rashad Bateman. They just gave him a contract extension, and Derrick Henry's still there. So, and with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, there's plenty of mouths to be fed in this Ravens passing offense with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins as well. I feel like that could might take away some of his touchdowns if they use D Hop in the red zone the right way. So that's definitely one of my concerns to say. And then another concern with Olave is just the quarterback play. I mean, is Tyler Shough really going to be that guy for them? I mean, we don't really know, and I'm not too interested in finding out. So I'm definitely out on those two guys for the rest of this year. And in terms of Brandon Ayuk, I definitely think Brandon Ayuk is undervalued. I mean, at this 12 months ago, he was valued basically as a wide receiver 1, low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. But, he tore his ACL, but he does have that contract extension. So, he's getting $30 million a year. And because of that, he's going to be guaranteed at least some type of production for the next 2 to 3 years. So, you're going to be getting something out of him. Now, what his ceiling is, we don't know after this ACL tear, but I definitely say he has a solid floor. And, there's also is the possibility he does get traded. Now, I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. There has been some tension with him and Brock Purdy, relationshiply wise. But if he does get moved, I definitely think he'd be getting moved to be an alpha wide receiver 1 for somebody's offense. Now, to end out this tier, we got the 2 rookie tight ends, Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren. These guys are great out of college, and they're both athletic, and they're definitely gonna be the day 1 starters. Almost, maybe not so much for Colson Loveland. I feel like he'll get more phased into that role with some 12 personnel, but I definitely think he'll be the tight end to take over that tight end room. And with Tyler Warren, I mean, he's definitely going to be the tight end one. The Colts haven't had a tight end, I feel like, since Dallas Clark, and that was probably like 15 years ago. So I feel like he can definitely slot into that role and be great, but I wouldn't be too optimistic on their actual fantasy productions this year, but I definitely think they'll be able to hold their value. So now this brings us to the back half portion of my ranks. This is player 76 and on. So a majority of these guys are going to be, your veterans. These are going to be the guys that you're actually targeting more highly in your redraft leagues. But right now for Dynasty, these guys are not the premium guys you want. But just to go through it, we have wide receivers such as DJ Moore, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy, and Jalen Waddle, and Josh Downs. So with all these guys, they're definitely locked in to get a good amount of work. A lot of these guys are their wide receiver 1 on their team, or a 1A, or at worst a wide receiver 2. But all these guys, we've seen them produce in the past. I mean, DJ Moore has had a wide receiver 1 season before. Jameson Williams just had his breakout year. George Pickens as not the number 1 target in an offense now. We could definitely see that be help that open him up a little bit. And Terry McLaurin, he's in a contract holdout right now, which at the time of this recording, I definitely made this before, and I'd probably drop him a little bit lower than he is now, but he did just score 13 touchdowns and had his first wide receiver 1 season of his career, and he's also tied to the best QB of his career in Jaden Daniels. So there's definitely no reason to be completely out on Terry McLaurin, but just to finish up the rest of these receivers, we got Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, and Josh Downs. Jerry Jeudy just had his first wide receiver 1 year. That may be a large part due to Jameis Winston throwing the ball around, but they got the second best thing in that in Joe Flacco, because Flacco's just going to go out there and sling the ball around. I mean, that's what he's there to do at this point in his career. Jalen Waddle, he's still the wide receiver 2 behind Tyreek Hill in this Miami offense, but I definitely think this is going to be a buy low spot for Jalen Waddle. I think this could be Tyreek Hill's last year. I'm unsure of how many years is left on his contract, but we've seen Jalen Waddle be a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 before. He's just had very bad injury history the last 2 years, and he just hasn't produced the way we've normally wanted him to. Now with Josh Downs, he had a great rookie year, and he's great in the slot, but he's also really versatile, which makes him a really valuable asset in this Colts offense, not only in real life but in our dynasty leagues, because we know he's going to get used in multiple ways. They're going to try to figure out ways for him to get the ball, so that's definitely not a bad thing. But the only problem is that if Anthony Richardson's a QB for this team come week 1, I'm definitely a lot more worried. I'd much prefer Daniel Jones, because we know Daniel Jones can actually complete over 50% of his passes, but it is also Daniel Jones. So I wouldn't be too stoked, and I feel like the Colts are definitely going to be replacing this whole QB room at the end of this year. But now to get on to the running backs, we have Chuba Hubbard and Derrick Henry. These guys are, you can put them in your lineups, and you're going to feel good about them either as probably as your RB2, at least for Chuba Hubbard. Derrick Henry can definitely still produce as your RB1. He's going to get a ton of touchdowns, and he's going to get a bunch of carries inside the red zone. So, we got no issues with Derrick Henry there. The only issue with him is that he's older. He's 30, going on 31. So, we might see the wheels finally start to fall off a little bit, but I wouldn't be too worried. And with Chuba Hubbard, he just got his contract extension, so I really feel like he's at least locked in for at least the next 2 years as Jonathan Brooks still recovers from the ACL. And it's really just so sad to see that he had to go through that twice in the same knee. But I think that just means that Chuba Hubbard is now just going to have his role locked in. And then once Jonathan Brooks is fully back, we'll see what happens from there. And then the tight ends in this tier, George Kittle and TJ Hawkinson. George Kittle can definitely have another monster year. I mean, he's never been not good, basically. And the only thing that worries me about him is that his injuries, He's always dinged up, missing a couple games, but that's just because of how physical of a player he is and how well of a run blocker and a pass blocker he is. But his fantasy upside is definitely still there. I definitely see him producing. He has a chance to produce as the tight end 1, but I think his floor is definitely a top 5 tight end at the end of this year. So you can't go wrong with George Kittle if you're a contender, but if you're a rebuilder, please, please, please sell George Kittle before it's too late. And then with TJ Hawkinson, I think he definitely slowed down a little bit. The ACL recovery from last year, I think that definitely slowed him down a bit. But I think a year removed from that, he might be able to finally go back to the old TJ Hawkinson that we've known him for. And, as long as he builds a good rapport with JJ McCarthy, I don't see any reason to why he can't produce to the way he used to be. So now these next 2 tiers, my tier 10 and 11, this really just depends on whether you're a rebuilder or a contender, to whether you're going to be drafting these guys in your startups or trading for them or not. I feel like you're in a startup and you're trying to build the most value on your team. You're definitely going with guys like Ricky Pearsall, Luther Bird, and Jaden Higgins or Trey Harris. Out of this 4, I definitely think Trey Harris is the worst. He's definitely my least targeted one. Greg Roman offense has never produced a real wide receiver 1 outside of Anquan Bolden back in the 2010s. Actually, it was not Anquan Bolden, it was Michael Crabtree in 2012 when they went to the Super Bowl. But, he definitely still has that chance to, be the outlier. He's a huge, huge receiver. He is a great red zone weapon. And, he has all the athletic skills to be able to be a wide receiver 1. Now, with other guys like Ricky Pearsall, Luther Burden, Jaden Higgins, Ricky Pearsall, it definitely depends on, how Ayuk looks coming out of the gate and, what role Juwan Jennings has in this offense. Because, we saw Juwan Jennings be a wide receiver 2 last year. He was wide receiver 24. And, I don't think many people saw that, but Juwan Jennings is still definitely a target hog in this offense, and Brock Purdy trusts him a lot. So that's definitely cause for concern with Ricky Pearsall. But we saw Ricky Pearsall at the end of the year be great. He definitely had one of the hardest coming into the NFL careers that we've seen in recent memory, getting shot, dealing with those injuries before even being shot. So, we're glad to see that he's healthy and doing well now, and, I think we have room for optimism for him this year. Now, with Luther Burden, I think it's kind of the same case, what I was talking about with Rome and DJ Moore. It's going to depend on who gets all the targets in this offense. I definitely see Luther Burden as the slot guy here, but that doesn't mean that he can't not be good in from the slot. He could definitely get peppered with targets, but it really just depends on how these guys come out. And with Jaden Higgins, he could definitely produce as the wide receiver 2 in this offense. They had drafted him and Jalen Noel. They're both teammates at Iowa State, so that was definitely interesting to see the Texans do, but I don't see why Jaden Higgins couldn't just slot in on the other side of Nico Collins. Nico Collins obviously taking the X, so if Jaden Higgins can fit well in the Z role, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to produce for fantasy football. Now down at tier 11, we have our older vets, our older receivers that, used to be at the top of the tiers, like where Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and Puka used to be. So we have Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, and some other and some lower tier guys, such as not lower tier, but lower skill, I would say at this point, with some more longevity. But Chris Godwin and Courtland Sutton. If you're a contender, I'm definitely targeting Tyreek Hill this offseason, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. These guys you can probably get for a second round pick or maybe a first and second round pick swap. But these guys are still elite. Tyreek Hill is still a top 10 receiver in this league, in my opinion. He's still one of the greatest downfield threats that we've ever seen, and he's still doesn't seem like he's lost too much of a step. So I don't see why he's not going to be utilized a lot in this Mike McDaniel offense. Mike Evans and Devontae Adams, these guys are just consistent. These guys are Mr. Consistency. Mike Evans never had under 1,000 yards in a season, and Devontae Adams is now going to play with Matt Stafford. So he's getting a QB upgrade in my opinion, from Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is definitely a shell of himself than what he used to be. And I think that in a Sean McVay offense, Devontae Adams is finally going to be utilized in the way that he's supposed to be, like how he used to be in Green Bay. So definitely target these guys if you're contenders, but if you're rebuilders, I'm selling these guys. Chris Godwin and Courtland Sutton, they're definitely a little bit younger. Chris Godwin obviously has a little more injury concern, but he also did just get a big contract from Tampa Bay, and he also turned down a lot more money from New England. So that definitely makes me think that there's a mutual investment in the team and the player to where Chris Godwin's going to be a good fantasy wide receiver for you for the next 2 to 3 years. And then Courtland Sutton is obviously the number one target in this Broncos offense right now. He had all the trust of Bo Nix last year, and I don't see somebody that in this Broncos wide receiver room that's going to take him out of that X receiving role. So I really don't see any limitations to Courtland Sutton. I think Courtland Sutton and Chris Godwin definitely have some of the safest floors in Dynasty right now. So if you're contending, go pick those guys up. Now, with the rest of these guys on this tier, we have Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, and David Montgomery. If you're a rebuilder, trade these guys immediately, even if it's just for like a second-round pick. I think they're still worth a second-round pick. Or, you hold them until the middle of the year, and you get them for more when people actually need to start scoring points and trying to win Dynasty championships. So definitely keep these guys on, keep them properly valued. And, they're still going to produce. Joe Mixon has been consistent over his whole career, basically. Same goes for Alvin Kamara, but these guys are both get a lot of volume, and there's not a lot of competition for them in their backfield. So there's no reason for you to have any trust in these guys. These guys are going to put up a lot of points for you, at least for this year. And then next year, Kamara is definitely a little bit more older, so that might limit him for the following year after this year. But at least for this year, those two guys are going to be great. And with David Montgomery, he's still going to, get a lot of those touchdowns in that role. He's really good with Jahmyr Gibbs in that, that 50-50, 60-40 type of fashion. So there's definitely nothing wrong with rostering David Montgomery if you're a contender. But, if any of these guys in tier 11, if you're rebuilding, try and get these guys off your team either now or, hold out for a little bit into the season when people actually start dealing with injuries and bye weeks. People are going to come paying up for these guys. And the last guy on this tier is Geno Smith. This is the only QB. Geno Smith, I think, is going to have a big bounce back here. Now he's back with Pete Carroll. He's got great weapons around him. They drafted Jack Besh. They got Ashton Dempsey to run the ball to go along with arguably the best tight end in football right now, Brock Bowers. And the wide receivers outside of that aren't terrible. Jacoby Myers is underrated in my opinion. I think he can definitely produce. Jacoby Myers is definitely a consistent wide receiver, so he'll definitely be a safety target for Geno Smith this year, I think. So now this will bring us to the last couple tiers we have. Starting off with tier 12, we got some running backs in here. We got Cam Scatterbo and James Conner. These two guys, Cam Scatterbo definitely has the opportunity to take over this Giants backfield. I'm not a big believer in Tyrone Tracy. He wasn't the best runner, but Tyrone Tracy does have the good hands as he used to play receiver, but Cam Scatterbo really looked like one of those guys that can just do it all for you as a running back. So I can definitely see that playing in his favor and taking over this Giants backfield. And he was drafted in the 4th round, but this running back class was so deep that it doesn't even bother me at all. That feels more like a day 2 pick, knowing that he was one of the first guys taken in the 4th round this year. And then James Conner, if you're contending, keep him. He was great last year. He's a workhorse. He still gets injured a little bit, but he's going to produce. He averaged almost 16 points a game last year, which was almost unheard of. And we're always downplaying James Conner, but he's been really consistent while he's been in Arizona, even going back to his days in Pittsburgh. Some of the players in this tier, I like the QB. We got Fields, Tua, and Sam Darnold. All these guys I don't see them being real valuable assets after 2-3 years. I definitely think Fields and Darnold are definitely the most at risk because they don't have the contract. Darnold can be cut basically after this 1 year if he has a stinker in Seattle. So there's no guarantees with him. And same with Justin Fields. Justin Fields is only like a 2-year contract. So He's really gonna have to earn that second contract if he wants to stay. Same with Darnold. So, but with Tua, Tua's I feel like it's almost in the worst position because he could be one concussion away from having to medically retire, which would be really unfortunate. But he also just hasn't been that great the past year, So especially when it comes to your fantasy playoffs, and you need wins and it gets cold weather, Tua just doesn't play well in the cold, unfortunately. But that's just how it is. So that's why I have those guys so far down there. And then the rest of these guys in this tier, we have a couple tight ends: David Njoku, Tucker Kraft, Dalton Kincaid. All these guys are pretty equal in my eyes. Njoku's going to the last year of his deal, so I definitely see this being as like his big year if he wants to get another contract. So keep an eye out on him if you're in need of a tight end as a contender. Definitely go pick him up. But if you're one of these real rebuilding teams, go try and pick up Tucker Kraft or Dalton Kincaid. Their value if definitely isn't crazily high right now, especially Dalton Kincaid after he was basically valued as a top 5 dynasty tight end after his rookie year and was very much drafted a lot and highly in a lot of startups last year, including by me, which was probably my biggest dud on the whole year. But definitely still buy into these guys. These guys have the potential. They're with good quarterbacks. They're in good offenses. So the opportunity is definitely there. It's just whether they make the most of that opportunity or not. And then to finish out this tier, we got Khalil Shakir, Jaden Reed, Michael Pittman Jr. All these guys are basically the wide receiver 2 in their offense right now, or wide receiver 3. But Michael Pittman Jr. He did have that huge year 2 years ago. He's a big target hog. He was almost a wide receiver 1. He was a high end wide receiver 2. So we could definitely see him bounce back with some good quarterback play. Khalil Shakir, I definitely think is poised for another mini breakout. He's the slot receiver there, and there's nobody really competing with him for that role, unless Elijah Moore somehow turns out to actually be what he was supposed to be when he was drafted by the Jets. And then Jaden Reed, I'm not too fond of, but he still has his value. He's definitely young. He's shown us flashes of 30 plus points a game, not per game, but he also has incredible stinkers where he's only giving you like 2 catches for like 2.5 points. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how he's used with Matthew Golden now and all those other weapons there. So all these guys in this tier, you don't want them to be as like your wide receiver 3. You want them to be like more of as like a flex or a backup for a bye week type of option. So then that'll bring us to the next tier actually, and that'll bring us to tier 13. This tier definitely is a lot more younger guys for the most part. So the only QB I have here, Anthony Richardson. I'm still in on Anthony Richardson, but I just don't think he'll be good with the Colts. I think they've just completely ruined him. But I think in a new situation, we could see a little bit of a resurgence. And, he still has that crazy athletic ability. And with his ability to run and score rushing touchdowns, running the ball, he has crazy arm talent. He's definitely still a viable option in Dynasty. So, if you are a contender and you have a second round pick to you want to take a chance on him, do it. Why not? I mean, if you want to burn, it could end up being a burn second round pick, but Anthony Richardson could also turn out to be like a top 12 fantasy QB. It's just a matter if he's an actual good NFL QB to dictate if he's going to be valuable in Dynasty or not. And then there's a lot of running backs in this tier. We got DeAndre Swift, Pacheco, Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, Trey Benson. I think all these guys could definitely carve out a role this year. Charbonnet is definitely be the most situation dependent, depending on if Kenneth Walker is hurt or not. But I think DeAndre Swift, Pacheco, Brian Robinson, those guys could definitely also they should be the day one starters come out week 1. And if I had to pick one I'm most high on this year, it would definitely be DeAndre Swift. He's in the best offense, the best offensive line. And, I don't see why he shouldn't be able to succeed. The offense definitely isn't focused on him. There's a ton of other receiving weapons they have to focus on. So I don't see why DeAndre Swift could be bad. I think Pacheco could definitely have a bounce back here. He didn't look great when he came back from injury in the playoffs. He was only getting like 5 to 7 carries a game. But, I think that just is part of the recovery process. It's a mental thing too. So definitely buy low on some of these guys if you're a contender. But, if, like I said, if you're rebuilding, there's no reason to keep a Pacheco or a Charbonnet or a Brian Robinson on your team, because all these guys they're running backs. it's the most volatile position in the NFL. So all these guys could definitely be replaced in a year from now. So definitely just be mindful when you're building your team and drafting on these running backs. And this will bring us to the final tier. I know we finally made it, but in this final tier, it's a lot of older guys, but it's also, the one rookie. You got Kyle Williams. I think Kyle Williams could definitely prove to be the wide receiver one in this Pats offense. I mean, only guy else there is Stephon Diggs, who's also in this tier. I have Kyle Williams a little bit ahead of Stephon Diggs just because of age. Stephon Diggs is going to be 30 or 31, I believe. And Kyle Williams is a rookie drafted in the 3rd round, so he has decent draft capital. I mean, day 2 wide receivers aren't always hits, but there's no reason why Kyle Williams shouldn't be good. I mean, they whiffed on Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. I mean, I could definitely see both of those guys getting released. And then outside of that, it's Matt Collins, Pop Douglas, Kayshon Boutte. I mean, if Kyle Williams can't beat out those guys, then it just wasn't meant to be, in my opinion. But the only other quarterback in this tier is Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford definitely still has at least, I think, one more good fantasy year. He was a QB2 last year. And, he definitely could play around for another year after this. I know he got a Super Bowl, but, I still think he's hungry. He still wants to play. And he has great weapons around him and a great system. So, no reason why Matt Stafford can't continue to do what he's usually been doing. The 2 tight ends I have in this tier, Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. Mark Andrews definitely could become irrelevant after this year. It's the last year of his contract, and they're trying to get Isaiah Likely more involved. But I think Mark Andrews for this year. If you're a contender, go out and get him. I don't see why he wouldn't be another tight end, be a tight end one. He's one of Lamar's favorite targets, and he's been consistent. And with Kyle Pitts, I mean, I'm still in on Kyle Pitts, and he has great talent, but he just hasn't been utilized. But I think with Michael Penix now, he'll be a lot better used, a lot more effectively used, and he'll actually be targeted because Kirk Cousins just wasn't throwing him the ball last year. So I definitely think Kyle Pitts has a little bit of a bounce back compared to consensus is. And then the only running back I have in this group, in this tier, Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is definitely, I think, one of the most underrated guys right now. I don't think the Titans offense can get any worse than what it was last year. So that means that Tony Pollard probably won't be getting any worse than what he was last year. And last year he was a running back too. So, I think with an elevated offense, with a real QB there like Cam Ward and, Brian Callahan, year two of being a head coach, I definitely think that their ceiling, their floor should be raised a little bit, but so should the ceiling. So I definitely think Tony Pollard could squeak his way back into being a running back 1 if he's utilized correctly and they actually are able to score points this year. So, and then to finish out this tier and finish out the video, we have Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, and Jacoby Myers. All these guys they're all veterans. If you're contending, you definitely want these guys on your roster. I'm definitely the most high on Calvin Ridley now that he has a gunslinging quarterback like Cam Ward. Definitely think he could, end up with 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns this year. And, that's definitely in the realm of possibilities. But it also goes for Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs, he's coming off the ACL tear, but he's gonna have Drake May as his quarterback, and he's the only established receiving option in that wide receiver room, just like Calvin Ridley. So I don't see why these guys wouldn't be able to produce in a high way this year. And Jacoby Myers, he's been consistent. He's the wide receiver 1 there right now. And, his only competition is Brock Bowers and Jack Bech for the most part. So there's really no reason why he shouldn't be at least a wide receiver 3. Maybe he could be a wide receiver 2. He was a wide receiver 2 either last year or the year before. I don't have it right now on the top of my head. But, yeah, there's no reason why Jacoby Myers can't just be doing what he does, especially with the improved QB play and Geno Smith. Geno Smith's one of the more pass-happy QBs, and I don't see why him and Geno don't establish a strong connection straight away. So that is my top 125 Dynasty rankings right now, guys. Upcoming videos, we're going to have some buys and some sells at each position. Let me know what positions you guys want to see first. I'm open for anything. And, going forward, we're definitely going to start doing some redraft stuff, the closer we get towards actual redraft season. So probably come in July, we're going to start doing some of that. But for now, thanks for watching, and have a good night. Thank you, guys. Peace.